The strangest thing about this World Cup isn't who won, it isn't who lost, it isn't even the teams that stumbled out of the gate. It's that 48 teams have already stepped onto the biggest stage in football, and somehow the picture is becoming less clear, not more. Usually the opening round gives us answers. This time it created a different problem. The deeper you look, the less anyone seems to know, and that's where World Cups become dangerous, because confusion is where the trophy usually hides. People always panic after the first games. Every tournament it happens. Fans overreact, headlines explode, predictions collapse overnight. But history keeps repeating the same lesson. Champions rarely look like champions immediately. Slow starts happen, awkward performances happen, doubt happens. Sometimes what looks like weakness is actually camouflage. But this tournament feels different because underneath the score lines there are questions building everywhere. Questions nobody seems comfortable answering yet. And the first one might be England, because for years England played with fear. You could almost see it, the caution, the hesitation, the weight of previous failures sitting on every pass and every decision. It always felt like a team playing with the handbrake pulled up. Then came change. Under Tuchel, people started noticing something strange. England looked freer. The football felt different, more aggressive, more willing to take risks. The shackles looked gone, and suddenly the question stopped being whether England had talent. Nobody questions that anymore. The question became something else. Can courage survive pressure? Because group games are one thing. Knockout football is different. Entire tournaments can swing on one mistake, one penalty, one bad touch, and pressure has a funny way of bringing old habits back to life. Maybe England are transformed, or maybe the ghosts are simply sleeping. Then there's the United States, and this gets complicated fast because their midfield looks like controlled chaos, energy everywhere, constant movement, intensity, aggression. When it works, it feels overwhelming. But there's another side to this. Energy can dominate weaker teams. Elite control is different because against the biggest sides in the world, running harder isn't always enough. Sometimes the game slows down, sometimes the spaces disappear, sometimes matches become chess games instead of fist fights, and suddenly that energy becomes a risk. Because what happens when enthusiasm meets precision? That's the mystery surrounding the Americans. Not whether they can compete, whether they can control. And control matters because of what comes next. Portugal, or maybe more specifically, Cristiano Ronaldo. Because this isn't really a football question anymore. It's become something bigger. It's become the Ronaldo riddle. Every World Cup eventually creates one impossible conversation. This one may already have found it, because Ronaldo still has moments. That's the problem. Not full games. Moments, seconds, one movement, one finish, one flash that reminds everyone exactly who he is. But modern football can be brutal. Systems matter. Pressing matters. Movement matters. And suddenly teams face an uncomfortable choice. Do you build around the legend, or do you build around the system? Because if you choose the player, maybe the team suffers. But if you choose the team, you risk leaving football history sitting on the bench. And there is no safe answer. There never was. Then you move to Turkey, and things start becoming even stranger, because talent was never the issue. People have said that for years. Every generation arrives with excitement. Every generation creates expectations. Every generation looks ready, and somehow the same feeling keeps returning. Almost there. Almost enough. Almost dangerous. Until suddenly they aren't. Because talent can survive mistakes for a while. Organization cannot. Discipline cannot. World Cups punish chaos faster than almost anything in sport. And Turkey's problem isn't ability, it's memory. The memory of previous failures hanging over every new attempt. And football remembers everything. But every World Cup also creates someone unexpected, someone nobody planned for, someone nobody can prepare for. This time that conversation started moving toward Diamande from Ivory Coast. Because every tournament creates a breakout story. One player arrives and suddenly giant teams start asking difficult questions. Who is this? Where did he come from? How do we stop him? And the dangerous thing about breakout players is nobody has enough information. Systems can prepare for stars. Chaos is harder. Unknown players create panic. And panic changes tournaments. Then things become even more uncomfortable because Tunisia introduced something football always pretends to understand but never really does. The magical manager theory. Hervé Renard has developed a strange reputation over the years. almost mythical. The manager who appears in difficult situations and somehow changes the atmosphere. But changing coaches during major competitions has always felt like playing with fire, because sometimes it creates miracles, and sometimes it creates confusion. The problem is nobody knows which one is happening until it's too late, and that uncertainty keeps spreading, especially when you look at France, because France may be the most dangerous team nobody fully understands. Sometimes they look completely loose, almost chaotic, players drifting everywhere, improvising, creating, playing football without visible structure, and then suddenly they look completely different, organized, controlled, precise, which raises a weird question. Is France flexible, or does France still not know exactly what France is? Because there's a difference. And in knockout football, identity matters. Just ask Brazil, because Brazil might have the biggest mystery in the entire tournament. For years, people knew what Brazil represented. Maybe they lost, maybe they won, but people understood the identity. Now, nobody seems certain. Under Ancelotti, the questions keep multiplying. Are they a possession team? A transition team? A pressing team? What exactly are they trying to become? Because right now, it feels like several versions of Brazil are fighting each other, and tournaments don't give teams much time for identity crises. Then Spain enters the picture, and suddenly, the problem becomes terrifyingly simple: dependence. Because teams can look unstoppable until one thing changes. One injury, one absence, one moment. Players like Williams and Yamal create advantages other teams simply cannot replicate. But World Cups become cruel when margins shrink, because depth matters, until suddenly individual brilliance matters more. And then dependence becomes vulnerability, which leads somewhere bigger, Africa, because something strange has happened for years. People kept repeating the same story: talent gap, talent gap, talent gap, as if that explained everything. But tournaments like AFCON created a different reality: battle readiness, pressure experience, organizational toughness. The assumption was always that talent lived elsewhere. Now people are starting to ask whether the assumption itself was wrong, because these teams no longer look surprised to be here. And that's a dangerous shift, very dangerous. But then we arrive at the final mystery, and somehow it feels impossible: Lionel Messi. Because logic says time wins eventually. Time wins against every player, every legend, every career. The body slows down, the speed disappears, the margins get smaller. That's how football works. Except Messi keeps creating problems for logic itself, because he doesn't seem to need full matches anymore. He needs moments, seconds, tiny windows, a pass, a turn, a touch. That's what makes this so unsettling. Argentina doesn't always look perfect. Sometimes they look vulnerable. Sometimes they look dependent. Sometimes they look flawed. And yet nobody relaxes. Because as long as Messi is standing there, the threat remains alive, which creates a strange kind of fear, not fear of dominance, fear of possibility, because possibility changes behavior. Possibility changes tactics. Possibility changes entire tournaments. And maybe that's the mystery nobody can explain. Everyone entered this World Cup looking for certainty. Who looks strongest? Who looks weakest? Who feels ready? Who feels broken? Instead, they found uncertainty everywhere. England's courage, America's control, Portugal's dilemma, Turkey's history, France's identity, Brazil's confusion, Spain's dependence, Africa's rise, Messi's impossible existence. The answers still aren't here. Not yet, but something else is happening. The masks are beginning to fall, because the next round doesn't just decide who advances, it decides who these teams actually are. And that's where things become dangerous, because every World Cup starts with possibilities, but eventually possibilities run out. Eventually the tournament forces the truth into the open, and when that moment arrives, somebody's dream becomes real, somebody's illusion collapses, and somebody's mystery finally gets answered.